At dusk, a bell sounded above medieval Galway. Merchants gathered their goods, travellers hurried towards the gates, guards prepared to close the town behind heavy wooden doors. Inside the walls were houses, workshops, crowded lanes, churches, markets, and some of the wealthiest merchants in Western Ireland. Beyond them lay the roads and countryside upon which the town depended. What was life really like inside a medieval Irish town? There was no single type of medieval town in Ireland. Dublin and Waterford developed from important Viking settlements. Towns, including Galway and Drogheda, expanded under Anglo-Norman rule, while older monastic and ecclesiastic centres continued to attract trade and settlement. Their populations, languages, and systems of government differed. Nevertheless, the surviving history of Ireland's walled towns allow us to reconstruct something of everyday urban life between the 13th and 16th centuries. Galway provides one of the clearest examples. A stone castle was built there by Richard de Burgo in 1232. During the later 13th century, the growing settlement was given permission to collect tolls to help finance its walls. By the early 1400s, most of the town had been enclosed. The walls surrounded an area of approximately 11 hectares and included gates, towers, and defensive positions. These fortifications could protect the inhabitants during conflict, but defence was not their only purpose. A gate allowed the town authorities to examine arriving travellers and collect tolls on goods entering the market. The walls also defended the corporation's territory, the area in which its officials could enforce regulations and control commercial activity. Walls were there for military, economic, and political boundaries. The town inside was organised around streets, divided into long, narrow properties known as burges, pots. A burgess might have a house facing the street, with workshops, sheds, gardens, or other buildings extending behind it. By the late 1320s, Galway had more than 200 burges. These were recognised members of the town community who possessed particular trading rights and civic responsibilities. Their houses were not all alike. Wealthy merchants built substantial stone residences along the principal streets. Some combined business premises, storage, and family accommodation within the same building. Surviving structures such as Lynch's Castle show how impressive these urban houses could become. The poorer inhabitants experienced a very different town. Smaller dwellings were crowded into lanes and alleys behind the main streets. Timber, straw, and thatch remained important building materials, especially for people unable to afford stone and slate. By the beginning of the 16th century, perhaps 2,000 people were living inside or immediately around Galway's walls. This was not a large city by modern standards, but compressed into such a small area, it would have felt intensely busy. The streets were filled with shopkeepers, craftspeople, servants, labourers, clerics, animals, carts, and visiting traders. Work was rarely separated from domestic life. A craftsperson could manufacture and sell goods from the same building in which the family ate and slept. Merchants stored valuable cargo close to their homes, while gardens and small yards behind houses provided useful food and working space. Markets were central to the town's survival. People arrived from the surrounding countryside carrying grain, vegetables, butter, eggs, poultry, and other products. Craftspeople offered leather goods, metalwork, cloth, and household objects. Town officials regulated prices, measurements, and the places in which particular goods could be sold. Galway's market area stood close to the Church of St. Nicholas. A market cross provided a recognised public location where announcements could be made and justice could be displayed. The town's prosperity also depended upon the sea. Ships connected Galway with ports in Britain and continental Europe. Wine, salt, textiles, and luxury goods could arrive from abroad, while hides, fish, and other Irish products entered wider trading networks. Waterford provides particular vivid evidence of these international connections. Medieval vestments preserved there were made from Italian silk and embroidered in Bruges. Objects of such quality demonstrate that Irish towns were not isolated at the edge of Europe. Their merchants participated in trading networks stretching far beyond Ireland. Yet urban prosperity brought serious dangers. Fire was a constant threat. Buildings stood close together. Open flames were used for heating, cooking, and lighting, and many roofs contained dry thatch or straw. Galway experienced significant fires in 1412 and 1473. These disasters probably encouraged greater use of stone among people wealthy enough to afford it. In 1521, the corporation ruled that straw or thatched houses could not be built or repaired within 14 feet of the town walls unless they were covered with slate. The regulation was extraordinarily precise, but its purpose was practical. A fire beside the wall could spread through nearby buildings and threaten a vital part of the town's defences. Sanitation created another challenge. Medieval streets could contain mud, animal waste, household refuse, and debris from different trades. However, it was misleading to imagine that nobody recognised the problem. Galway authorities issued fines when refuse accumulated outside homes, and parts of the streets were paved by 1505. Such rules were not always obeyed or successfully enforced, but they showed that townspeople attempted to manage their surroundings. Disease nevertheless remained a serious danger. Trading ships brought valuable goods, but they could also carry infection. Outbreaks of plague repeatedly affected Galway. Medieval records also mention leprosy, although that term could be applied to several diseases that people of the period did not distinguish in the modern medical sense. Religious institutions provided some of the limited care available to the sick and poor. Galway contained Franciscan, Carmelite, Dominican, and Augustinian communities, as well as the Church of St. Nicholas. The town's first recorded hospital or poorhouse appears in the early 16th century. Religion shaped the entire rhythm of urban life. Church bells marked the hours and summoned people to worship. Baptism, marriages, and burials connected families to their parish. Feast days and religious processions filled the streets, while monasteries and friaries offered charity, education, and spiritual support. The corporation governed many other aspects of daily behaviour. The mayor and civic officials oversaw trade, property, and public order. Regulations could determine where goods were sold, how buildings were repaired, and even which games people were permitted to play. In 1528, Galway imposed fines for playing cards, dice, and a board game known as tables. Such laws do not prove that gambling disappeared. Their repeated existence may suggest precisely the opposite. Life inside the walls were also shaped by identity. Medieval Galway developed as an English-speaking merchant town surrounded by predominantly Gaelic countryside. Its merchants needed food, materials, labour and customers from that hinterland, and commercial contact was unavoidable. At the same time, the corporation attempted at various periods to limit the entry or influence of Gaelic Irish families. The town was therefore neither completely separated from Gaelic Ireland nor completely integrated with it. Commerce drew communities together, while law and social privilege tried to keep them apart. This contradiction was visible at the gates. During the day, people, carts and merchandise entered and left. Tolls could be collected, travellers observed and access controlled. As darkness approached, a curfew bell warned the inhabitants to return. The gates were then locked. Night inside a medieval town would have been much darker than anything familiar today. Candles and oil lamp were valuable. Streets had little dependable illumination, and movement became more difficult and dangerous. Behind closed doors, families gathered around fires. Inns continued to shelter travellers and townspeople. Guards watched vulnerable parts of the wall, while bells and distant voices carried through streets that had been crowded only hours earlier. The closing of the gates did not merely provide security. It turned the town into a controlled community for the night. Those inside received the protection of its walls. Anyone approaching afterwards faced a physical barrier and the authority of those guarding it. Life in a medieval Irish town was therefore neither the romantic world of grand castles nor a place of unrelieved filth and disorder. It was regulated but unpredictable, prosperous but unequal, connected to Europe yet dependent upon the surrounding countryside. Its walls protected merchants and families from attack, but they also collected tolls, restricted entry, and separated people according to wealth, status, and identity. Its markets offered food and opportunity, but trade could also bring disease. Its narrow streets contained grand stone houses and humble thatched dwellings, sometimes only a short distance apart. When the curfew bell sounded and Galway's gates closed, the town's inhabitants were enclosed within far more than stone. They were enclosed within a carefully governed world of commerce, religion, privilege, danger, and community. That was everyday life inside a medieval Irish town.